Hello YouTube, this is Robert Ness 816 and I'm coming at you with another video. This time I'm going to be doing a how-to video. How to get the band and bezel from a GW50 or DW5600E to fit on your vintage DW5600C. So Casio completely changed the case design, leaving just the basic dimensions of the crystal and pushers in place, but for the most part the rest of the watch is a little bit different. So very simple to modify it. I recommend getting a a bezel and strap for a GW5000 because they're a bit softer, or you can just get a Thailand made strap and bezel because I believe that they're a little bit better made than the Chinese ones that you would typically get on a DW5600E. The resin color is a bit more uniform, as you can see here. It's all just kind of the same color of black. This one I can't really show you because I actually have a new Thailand made bezel on here, but the black does go better with the case. The Chinese ones are a bit more of a charcoaly color, black, instead of being a more deeper black like the Thailand made bezels are. Alright, so there are some differences between the two watches here. So you can see the bezel screws are in a different location. That's something you'll need to modify. And also the area between the spring bars and crystal is an area that needs to be modified. That is pretty much the main area that needs to be modified, because when Casio switched from a stainless steel case to a resin case, they had to beef up the weak points with the watch. So the area between the spring bars and crystals is thicker, and also the step area between the crystal and the case is actually thicker as well, to offer more bump resistance between the two. So I think that's an area where Casio actually improved the watch, because the older ones there, if you did drop it, you did actually risk cracking the crystal on them, because there is a step under the bezel on these newer ones that is quite prominent, and it is really just a thick layer of rubber, whereas on the older ones it's very kind of shallow. So when you drop the watch pretty much on an angle, it will absorb impact a lot better and prevent that crystal from possibly cracking. So that is one area where Casio improved on. These screws are also going to have to be changed as well, because Casio has them on an angle now with the newer watches, whereas the older ones, they just went straight into the case. So the strap is the easiest part to modify, so that's what I will start off with. So you are going to have side-to-side play if you take off too much material, and basically what I'm relying on is the bezel pressing against the strap for it not to have any side-to-side play, which is what I have here. And the spring bars will have a little bit of a bow to them as well, not too much, but just a little bit. So what Casio did was they beefed up this area here on the newer watches, which comes out to a point. So they really added quite a lot of material to this strap here to basically strengthen it, so it has a lot more material holding the strap onto the watch. So that was an improvement that they made, going from the 5600C to the E model. So what you need to do is take your flat soldering iron tip right here. This is a 60 watt iron, but you can use, like, I think it's a 40 watt actually, but you can use like a 30 watt or whatever, something hot enough to sufficiently melt the resin. And you need to kind of flatten this area, and it's going to be some trial and error basically getting it to fit onto the watch correctly. So once you have achieved that, you will see that the band fits on the watch a lot easier, because if you don't modify this at all, you will have a hell of a time trying to get those spring bars to align with the holes correctly. So once you've done that to both sides, then you can move on to the bezel part here. And again, like I said, you don't want to take off too much material though, because if you do, you'll just get a lot of slop inside the side play. So again, now with the bezel, this is the incorrect bezel, by the way. So if it looks different, then that's because this is for a G5600 or a GWM5610. So this step right here, as I mentioned, is pretty prominent on the newer watches and not that deep on the older ones. So what you need to do is take your soldering iron and just kind of smooth this step into this area of the watch right here, of the bezel rather. So make it pretty much line up with it, and then you're going to make this area molten as well. And while this is nice and hot, you're going to basically take the hot bezel, and remember your watch doesn't have a bezel obviously this time, but while the bezel is nice and hot, you're going to throw it onto the watch and impress it on with it still being hot, and that's going to basically force the case to basically mold to the, or rather the bezel to mold to the different case profile. So all the different shapes and everything in the step here will basically mold to the case here. So you're going to do that for both sides, and you're going to repeat that until you get a nice flush appearance like how this one is. So you can see how the bezel basically fits on the watch just like how it should. So there you have it. It looks pretty good. I mean, when I wear this watch, no one can really tell that it's a 30-year-old G-Shock. They think it's basically just a current one, unless you look at it from the side, of course, and you can see the stainless steel case sticking out. But yeah, so that's pretty much how it would look. So after you get the case to fit down, then there's the issue of the screw holes in here, getting them to align, because if you don't modify the screw holes, you'll have to actually kind of force these screws in, and that will put a lot of pressure on them. So these screws on the newer 5600Cs especially are really just cheap quality screws. So this is something where the more I look at these newer 5600Cs, the more I'm a little surprised at all the corners that Casio kind of cut on these watches. So remember, these are still selling for about 70 bucks back in the day. So not quite a cheap watch. So basically with these newer ones here with the 901 modules, I noticed these screws are very soft and they tend to strip out pretty easily. The older ones with the 691 modules have a much more prominent shape in them, like how the 5600E does today. So these screws are actually really good quality, and they're, you can deform them, but they're not really as soft as how these are. These are just, they're shockingly crappy. So what you want is a Phillips head screwdriver that fits into the screw head very firmly with no play at all. Same with these screws obviously as well. And these screws sometimes will be stuck into the case. So what you would do in that regard is heat up the case with a hair dryer. Not a heat gun, because a heat gun I think will damage the crystal, because these crystals have a tendency to delaminate quite easily. And what I mean by that is the graphics that are on a crystal can actually separate pretty easily. So, you don't want to damage that. So just heat it up just a bit, just enough to where it's, fairly warm, hotish. And then basically you can kind of work the screw forwards and backwards a bit. And that'll help to free the screws up if they're stuck in the case. So that's pretty much it. So after you modify the front and back of the bezel, you'll focus on the screw holes. So I'm going to zoom in and then focus here. Okay, so the area between the pusher and the screw hole here is what you're going to kind of look at. So this portion of the screw, the screw hole, is going to need to be elongated. So right here, this area, you're going to have to elongate it just a bit. And then same thing with all 4 screw holes. You're going to basically extend the screw hole out, just the inside of it, towards the pusher just a little bit. And the reason why is when you stick a 5600E bezel onto a 5600C, the screws don't align, because again, the screws on the new ones come out on an angle like this. Oops. They come out on an angle like this instead of going straight into the case. So you need to basically elongate that screw hole so that the threads the threads in the case will align with the screw hole in the case, and you'll need to basically push down and kind of make the case hole, the screw hole in the bezel align with the threads in the case. And after you're done, you'll kind of get that. Not perfect, but again, this is kind of a cheap way of getting a readily available part to fit in a discontinued watch with discontinued parts. So Casio has that restoration program, and you can send it back to them, and it's $100, and they'll basically replace all the parts on it. But for $50, you can put new spring bars, band bezel, battery, backplate gasket, and pretty much have the same thing. Only now, if you damage other parts, they're readily available instead of having to go through Casio. So when Casio makes these parts for the 5600C readily available, then yeah, obviously there's no point to this video anymore. But yeah, pretty much just that. So if you're thinking, why not just take the band and bezel from a current screwback square G-Shock, the answer to that is because the current screwbacks are just a copy of the plastic case screwbacks, or plastic cased square G-Shocks. So every place that Casio improved on the plastic cased G-Shocks, they did the same thing to the current screwbacks, because basically they just wanted to eliminate parts count and improve the older design to make it more durable. So again, you have a beefed up area where the lugs go, you have a deeper step in the bezel where the case kind of, or where the bezel kind of presses against the case to offer more protection to the crystal. And yeah, pretty much it's just a carbon copy of the current plastic cased watch down to pretty much the last detail. So you can see how they even beefed up the area here where the screw goes in. Same thing on the plastic cased watch. So yeah, that's why. So basically, if you buy a new screwback, you're pretty much buying a better version of the regular plastic cased watch. It's identical in every way. So don't think that you can just buy that and get away with it, because it's different. So anyways, if this video helps you out, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, tell me what you think in the comments, and feel free to ask me some questions. Alright, thanks for watching.